Were the ancient Assyrians more cruel than other peoples in the ancient days? Many have said so, so it must be true, no? Well, let's carefully look at the record. Recently, one writer, who calls himself the history junkie, wrote an article called, quote, "The Assyrians, the Appalling Lords of Torture. Impalement, flaying, and amputations were the trademark of the Assyrians," end of quote. That's what he said. In this article, as in so many, we are told that the ancient Assyrians were, quote, "cruel, barbaric, merciless, heartless, and brutal," end of quote, and so much more. We are told that the Assyrians relished, indeed enjoyed, killing, pillaging, and simply taking lives or making them miserable all over the ancient Near East for no apparent reason. One anthropologist, Carlton Kuhn, hated the Assyrians so much that he said, "The Assyrians have no direct linguistic or ethnic survivors," which is probably a mercy. Can you imagine anyone saying that about any other people? What about the historian Stuart Easton, who said, quote, "The Assyrians received no mercy as they had shown none." Then Easton said happily, "They disappeared from history. They were simply killed off." One journalist, Robert Bain, recently stated that of all the empires in history, quote, "ISIS has most in common with the ancient Assyrians." Writers today, and many of them historians, follow in the steps of writers in the 1800s, of Victorian times, who viewed the ancient Assyrians through the lens of the Old Testament, which gave the Assyrians, of course, an unfavorable image. Such writers also one-upped, if you will, the Old Testament by giving us their own take on history, being very creative and colorful in doing so. Take, for example, Lord Byron's poem called The Destruction of Sennacherib, an Assyrian king, where Byron starts by saying, "The Assyrians came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold." On and on. You get the point. The Assyrian is a wolf, preying on the innocents. He is powerful and wealthy, and not very nice. He is bad, and those he preys on are good. He seeks to destroy. And then, according to the Old Testament, God intervenes and destroys the Assyrians. And what does Byron say? "And the widows of Ashur are loud in their wail, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal. And the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, hath melted like snow in the glance of the Lord." Baal, of course, was a Canaanite, not an Assyrian god, much scorned in the Old Testament, and which writers such as Byron viewed as the very personification of evil in the ancient world. By associating the Assyrians with Baal, Byron portrays them as representatives of evil being targeted by God. The Assyrians represent evil, their enemies represent good. God is on the side of the good, so God is against the Assyrians. This is the ultimate point of Byron's poem. Let's not forget that Lord Byron, whose real name was George Gordon, was a member of the British imperial government. That was the government, after all, that conquered many lands, killed many peoples, and took a lot of wealth from many nations. Those peoples in Asia and Africa were not about to invade Britain. They were no threat to Britain. So where's the wolf here? We know that the Old Testament sparked the creativity of writers like Byron. But what about when archaeologists discovered and dug up Assyrian palaces and art and writing all after the death of Byron? What occurs then when writers should have a better view or a clearer view of what really happened in the ancient world? Do we get a truly clearer picture here, a more accurate picture? Where did the image of the Assyrians being more cruel than other ancient people come from? What's the truth behind all of this? Two facts must be recognized. First, the Assyrians loved to record not only what they did, but what others did around them. No civilization in the ancient world recorded as much as the Assyrians did. They told us a lot about war and battle. It is true, but they also told us about literature, diplomacy, building, farming, medicine, astronomy, and astrology. One writer, André Perot, tells us that no other civilization wrote, recorded, and kept as many archives as the ancient Assyrians did. Number two, in recording what they did, the Assyrians were graphic. They wanted us to know details. Their documentation was specific, complete, and exhaustive. Again, we do not find this in the ancient world, other than in Assyria. We don't find a detailed record, especially an artistic record, of battles, for example, in the ancient world as much as we find them in Assyrian artistic records. We do not know what other ancient people did through their art in such detail, and we are not sure of what they bragged about because we just don't have the records. We don't have that sort of detail that we have in the case of the Assyrians. The art of other ancient people, as well as their archives, are not as detailed as those of the Assyrians. Take a look, for example, at the detail in the lion hunts of Ashurbanipal. This type of detail is not found in any other cultures of the ancient world. The preparation of the hunt, the carrying out of the hunt, the type of weapons used, the details with the clothing of those who perform the hunting, the agony of the animals. All of this shows us incredible attention to detail that the ancient Assyrians paid. Naturally, this would be carried over in both art and writing to war and to battle. The ancient Assyrian kings told the truth from their perspective of what happened. Of course it was their perspective. What other perspective could there be? So, given the fact that the Assyrians had documented carefully in both art and writing what they had done in battles, were they more cruel than others? Did they do what other human beings did not do? Were the Assyrians engaged in beheading in battles? Of course. And they told us so, in graphic detail. But were others? Yes, of course. All ancient peoples engaged in this practice. Not only that, but beheading also occurred throughout history. In fact, all types of what we now consider abhorrent human behavior occurred in ancient and classical history. Humans being cruel to other humans is prevalent throughout history. Cruelties occurred in ancient times, in classical times, and, of course, in modern times. Let's look at the European portrayals of Judith, the heroine in the Old Testament, who uses her beauty and charm to behead an Assyrian general. Does this detail bother anyone? Or the severed heads being displayed in London, or impalement in Europe, or American soldiers taking photos with heads of Vietnamese peasants, or Turkish soldiers beheading Assyrians and Armenians, and more recently Kurds. What about photos of lynchings of African Americans in America? All of this shows us a side of us as human beings that is brutal and cruel. Brutal and cruel to each other. All of us. The history of brutality, of violence, is a part of the history of mankind. No people were immune from this type of brutality. Still, after all of this, could it be said that the ancient Assyrians were more brutal than other ancient peoples? Say, for example, the Persians. What has often been lauded as the very first human rights declaration, the Cyrus Cylinder, which claims to free captive peoples, is, according to those who studied it, simply a continuation of the policy of ancient Assyrian kings, and nothing different. That's right, a continuation. Persians, like the Assyrians, conquered other peoples. They freed some and slaughtered others. Would it make any sense to believe otherwise? Are empires in history created through geniality, through friendliness? Of course not. The so-called Cyrus Cylinder, then written in Akkadian, is simply one document in a line of similar documents, very similar to those created by ancient Assyrian kings, such as Sargon II, Sennacherib, and others. By the way, Sennacherib, the famous king in Lord Byron's poem, took pride in calling himself the protector of the weak. So let's now ask an important question. Is it nobler, is it somehow better in the mind to openly display acts of brutality that occurred, to tell the truth, for example, or to cover up wanton slaughter of civilians and to prosecute and imprison those, such as journalists, who report it? You decide the answer. Thank you. See you next time.